Rikki Bates is a rock and roll drummer who has struggled for much of her life with gender dysphoria. For years, like many transgender people, she lived in a state of confusion and depression. Then she managed to get gender-affirming surgery, which changed her life. In the process, she brought about precedent-setting changes in how transgender healthcare is provided to people in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. In this fascinating and wide-ranging interview with PFLAG Cape Cod's Rick Koonce, Rikki describes the bullying and psychological confusion she experienced as a child and adolescent, her struggles with depression as she entered adulthood, and the turnaround in her life that began to occur following multiple gender-affirming surgeries and intense personal therapy. She also reveals the fascinating step-by-step process of gender-affirming surgery itself, the challenges of dating as a bisexual trans woman, and her advice to others who think they may be transgender. Rikki Bates, welcome to Profiles in LGBTQ+ Courage. It's a pleasure and honor to have you here today.
Thanks, Rick. It's great to be here.
Rikki, you and I have spoken, and I know that you struggled with gender dysphoria for many years, and really from the time you were about 4 years old, if I'm not mistaken. Could you talk about your growing up years and that experience with gender dysphoria?
Yeah, I think the first sign that I had that something was different with me was like the first time I ventured out into a sandlot with the neighborhood boys. And it was before I was in kindergarten, and I think I was 4 years old. And, the kids, I wanted to play with them, but I just wasn't fitting in right away. They laughed at me. They thought it was funny. I didn't understand why they thought I was funny. They played kind of rough. And, they were hitting each other and pushing each other around and pushing me around. And I didn't like that. And then, when it came to playing, they laughed at me and thought I did things like a girl. And I didn't really quite understand what that meant because, I thought I knew the difference between a boy and a girl, but maybe at that age, it's kind of like, well, maybe I don't. I don't know and it made me, my feelings were hurt pretty bad. And they were punching me around, and then it was physically hurting. And
And, talk a little bit about what it is about the nature of boys' games that was sort of off-putting to you, that felt foreign to you.
Yeah, there was a very physical, and there was a real there was a real sort of a hierarchy that was going on there. There was the guy who was the sort of the king of everybody, and very competitive, and I don't know, and rough and physical in ways that I couldn't comprehend why I wasn't fitting in. But all that stuff just didn't work for me.
Oh. Yeah, and you were bullied, and were you beaten up? Was it that rough?
Yeah, I recall a moment when, the kids, they started punching me right away, and I'd never been hit like that before. My family, we never had anything like that going on when I was growing up. So, and then at one point, I remember I tried to hit the king bully back after he punched me really hard in the arm, and I tried to punch him in the stomach, and I was not physically strong. I was kind of weak, and I think it probably felt like a feather on his tummy, and he laughed, and he just wailed and punched me really hard in the stomach, and I went down. And I couldn't breathe. I remember I was on my back, and I couldn't breathe for a couple. I don't know how long. It seemed like forever. But I distinctly remember a crowd of kids gathering around and pointing at me and laughing. And one kid saying, "Oh, look, his lips are turning blue." And that was a really traumatic moment for me. It's something that I relive to this day on occasion.
Yes. It's a very old, young part of you that
Yes,
can be
yes.
triggered. I can imagine. Well, you
Yes.
eventually discovered a girls' play group, right? Tell me about that.
Well, yeah. So, I was really close with my parents, and every day they let them know what was going on. And when they found out that, especially after this incident, getting punched in the stomach, I think my mom was like, well, the girls, they just play down the road a little bit. If you just go down, the other direction, take a left, and why don't you go play with them, see what it's like. So I did. And I immediately felt like I fit in, and just the way that they were playing, and they were really accepting and just nice. And
Mm.
it was just like, okay, this is home, you know?
So you were anatomically male at the time. You were a boy, and
Mm-hmm.
as you grew up, talk a little bit about what the journey of self-reflection and self-exploration was like, because you were dealing, I know you've told me, with these feelings of gender dysphoria and feeling kind of out of place. So kind of walk us through your early adolescence.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, I continued to get beat up through elementary school. So that was going on, but I didn't really have the gender thing wasn't really coming crystal clear to me. It wasn't until I was in junior high and, puberty started happening, and there's all these changes happening in your body, and it didn't feel good to me. I didn't like the things that were happening to my body. And at the same time, I started to feel I wanted to experiment with what it would be like to be a girl. And I started wearing, I would sneak in when my mom wasn't home and try on some of her clothes, or, do stuff like that. And it was confusing to me. I felt like shame and guilt about it, but I at the same time I couldn't really help it, and it was something I didn't really want to have happening, but I couldn't help it.
And it was kind of your secret, right? Your deep, dark secret. Were you able to talk about this with anybody during those years?
No, no, no. So I was born in the 1950s. So, and I went to 1959 was the year I started school. So, boy, yeah, in the 1960s, you just no way I was ever going to tell anybody. I did not know. I'd never heard. I mean, I knew about people being gay or lesbian, but this didn't feel like that. Because the other piece of that was unusual for me, that made me feel more confused, was that I was physically and romantically attracted to girls. I wasn't attracted to boys, so that didn't really fit the gay thing.
So it left you wondering and sort of trying to figure out what was going on.
I did not, I'd never, the word transgender wasn't around, and I thought I was really weird, and like there was nobody else like me, and like totally afraid, especially because of my experience with the boys beating me up. Like if they knew what I was doing, oh my God. Yeah, so I kept the secret for a long, long, long time.
And there was no in-house therapist or counselor at the school, probably.
Oh no.
You and I are basically of the same generation. I remember those days. They were not the wonder years, were they?
No, they were then. Well, no, in some ways they were, but not, certainly not in this particular way.
And so during these years, so you're anatomically a boy, you're presenting as a boy. Did you date in junior high and high school, girls?
Well, no, I had I mean, there were girls that I had crushes on, but there's also this part of me that felt this, like I said, this hidden shame and stuff that made me, I was very shy. I was afraid, really afraid. I didn't know, and maybe a little bit of self-hatred. And, I mean, I did end up having a girlfriend by the time I was in ninth grade, I think, for a very, very short time. And that felt out of place. I just, because I had this thing I was hiding, and I just couldn't deal with it. So, and, relationships have always been tough for me.
Well, and I think adolescent years are tough enough, but if you add all of the issues of gender identity and a search for oneself as part of that, it can be really a challenge. And I can only imagine, Rikki, what you dealt with, but you found one refuge, which was music. So talk about that and how that has helped sustain you. It helped to identify you even from early years.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's interesting that, age 4 was also the year that I started, I really also another facet of my identity was, my music identity or my whatever identity. I don't know. But, is that I became attracted to drums and music. I mean, I loved music all along. And I from watching Mickey Mouse Club, there was this kid, Cubby. He played the drums, and he was a little bit older than me, but he was definitely a young kid. And I just wanted to be like that. I just wanted to be a drummer, I mean, I kind of wanted to be like Annette too, but it was, yeah. So, and then like when later on, when the Beatles played Ed Sullivan, once again, it was like, I saw that the first night they did that, and Ringo was just, I want to do that. So yeah, I started taking drum lessons and eventually got a drum set and really, really got into music. And music is an amazing thing. It really helps me connect to the universe, kind of in a way. It's a deeply spiritual thing, even, really.
Well, and you played as part of a band here on the Cape for many years. So talk a little bit about that. And you also started at the Berklee School of Music, but then dropped out. So just tell us what the chronology with all of that was.
Oh dear. Well, let's see. Well, in the early, after I graduated high school, I went to Berklee, and I was there for a few semesters. And ironically, one of my best friends from high school was also a drummer. He didn't go to music school, and he ended up getting into a fairly well-known band. And here I am going to music school, and it's like, nah, maybe this isn't the right path for me. So I dropped out, and then I ended up meeting these guys, Travis Shook and the Club Wow, and they had done a couple of Tonight Show appearances and were George Carlin's opening act. And I was really big fans of theirs, and they didn't have a drummer. So I was kind of like, they need me. And I ended up, they lived on Cape Cod. And I think I talked them into letting me sit in on drums for a song when some show they were playing. And they loved my playing. And, a couple of years later, they asked me if I wanted to do a recording session with them. And that's and they were living on Cape Cod. So I came to the Cape to rehearse. And we started making plans to do a band. And then I moved to Cape Cod.
And I know you played with them for many years, but during this time, the inner turmoil was continuing, right? And
And
I think it was around about this time in the 1990s, I guess, when you began to see a therapist.
Yeah, so I moved to the Cape in 1978, and I kept all of this stuff hidden. I got married in 1984. My wife knew about she was one of the first people I told about my feelings, and she was fine with it as long as it was like a part-time thing, but it was not something I could contain. And then eventually I felt like I needed to be my authentic self all of the time. And that's when I found a great therapist in Provincetown. And this would be right around 1990. And she helped me to come out and be myself full time. And the fallout of that was that my wife wanted to separate. And we eventually got divorced. And the band I was in fired me. Yeah, so they thought I was going to be bad for business, and which is crazy. This is rock and roll.
Yeah.
What do you? But some people have. Well, it's a fear of the unknown, I think, a little bit, and I don't know what. But yeah, so and the '90s ended up being a very dark period for me. I was extremely depressed. I didn't have any money coming in. Yeah, I think the very first year after it came out, I spent a lot of time in bed crying, and couldn't really do much more than that.
While we're talking about your time in Provincetown, I think this is actually an opportunity to state a distinction here. I know that Provincetown has a week. Is it Fantasia Week, which is
Fantasia Fair?
Yeah, and I think it's correct to say, and please inform me with more nuance, that people who cross-dress are not necessarily gay or transgender. They just like to cross-dress. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's a distinction there. And, it's interesting. So, I mean, around 1990, my therapist was from Provincetown, and she encouraged me to go to Fantasia Fair. And I did do Fantasia Fair for a few years, but it didn't feel to me like that was my crowd. There's actually a little bit of a difference, although I love those people. I love everybody in Provincetown. There's not a soul in Provincetown that I don't love, So even though a lot of people are very different from me, but the cross-dressers, by and large, first of all, you can't really completely generalize anybody in any of these categories. But for the most part, the cross-dressers in my experience were heterosexual males who liked being male most of the time, but
and they come to P-Town with their wives sometimes, right?
Yeah, oh, for sure, but they like to dress up and play the part of, or I don't know if that's I shouldn't say that. They like to express their femininity. They have a feminine side, and they like to express their femininity and get together and socialize and be in a place where they feel welcome, and that they don't have to hide their identity. And a big part of that is that they, the reason they're not out in public is because, they hold, important positions. And, some of them are, people I've met were CEOs or, like world famous physicists and, all kinds of things, doctors, lawyers, everything. And if they were found out, it would be disastrous. Just like as it was disastrous for me, it would be disastrous for them too.
Yeah.
So,
as we talk about this, I think a subject that comes up that I'd love to get your take on it. You identify as not only transgender, but also bisexual.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, Rikki, how you personally define masculinity versus femininity, masculine energy versus feminine, and is it on a continuum? Is there a metaphor that you use to kind of describe yourself?
Yeah, everybody's different. We're all different. Everybody's different. So, and it's hard because I still am not sure what's the difference between. I mean, well, actually, I do know. But. For me, and then the piece we really haven't touched on yet, but the key difference between me and the cross-dressers is that I have something called dysphoria, gender dysphoria, and it's a physical thing. It feels like my body's wrong, and a big part of my getting healed, was getting surgery. And so there's an incongruency between the way your brain feels and what is it that feels, I don't know what it is that's, what is femininity? I'm not even really sure,
Maybe these are just social constructs.
Well, there are social constructs, but it wasn't like when I was growing up, and even when I was playing with the girls in their sandlot, it wasn't like that. I preferred to play with Barbie dolls or anything like that. It didn't really have anything to do with that, and it wasn't that I so much about how I presented myself to the world. It was just how okay, the kids laughed at me when I threw the ball. You throw a ball like a girl. Well, that's just how I throw a ball. And if that's like a girl, then I guess that that's what I am, I guess. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, eventually you got a diagnosis of gender identity disorder from Mass General Hospital, and that began your trek through the medical and health insurance systems of Massachusetts, Rikki. So could you talk a little bit about sort of that journey?
Yeah, okay. So back then it was called gender identity disorder. They've fortunately changed that diagnosis to gender dysphoria because it's really not a disorder per se.
Just a difference.
It's a medical condition. A medical condition, not all medical conditions are a disorder. If you got a bad tooth, it's not a disorder. It's you got a tooth that needs to get pulled, right? So, but I got the diagnosis for that, and then I ended up getting on SSI because I had no income through my difficult years and the 90s, and through Mass General I got psychiatry, I got psychiatric help. They gave me psychiatric medications to try to help my depression, and nothing ever really worked that great. We tried all kinds of stuff, and I kept going there. And I also was able to get an endocrinologist there to prescribe me estrogen. And I began taking that. And the changes in my body that happened from the estrogen, although they were kind of minor in a lot of ways, they did make me feel somewhat better, although I still remained quite depressed. Yeah, and...
Well, so you continued, you were under doctor's care, and then talk about what happened when you brought suit for coverage of your health care, which by this time I imagine had become quite expensive.
Oh, yeah, I think it had always been really very expensive. I mean, as surgeries are. And actually, compared to other surgeries, I'm not sure it was any more expensive than... they're all really expensive, right? That's why we need insurance. And so...
I know in 2014, GLAAD, the Gay and Lesbian Advocates and Defenders, represented you in an appeal to Mass Health after they had denied your request for coverage. And that same year, Massachusetts decided that it would remove barriers to healthcare coverage for transgender people in both private insurance and public service. Talk about your role in helping to orchestrate and bring all of that about.
Yeah. Well, in the 2000s, I started to get restless and really wanted to find a way to get the surgery paid for. And so I ended up working with lawyers from GLAAD, and we did a series of appeals against various denials from Mass Health, which is the Medicaid provider in Massachusetts. And they first denied me hormone coverage. And this is our plan, although we really were aiming at getting the surgery covered, but we started with the hormones, and we did that appeal, and I won that appeal. And then we did a second, a request for surgery. Actually, what they call is a request for prior authorization for what we call the bottom surgery, which is gender surgery, what's between your legs. So, and then, of course, Mass Health denied that, and we appealed that. And while we were waiting a decision for that, Mass Health asked us if we would drop the charges against them if they paid for my surgery, which seemed really funny because they were fighting against it, and all of a sudden they changed their mind. And we thought that might mean that they just wanted to sort of sweep it under the table so that we wouldn't have a precedent-setting case and they wouldn't have to pay for other surgeries. But it turned out that wasn't the case. And so we accepted their offer, and then a couple days after we accepted the offer, Deval Patrick made an announcement.
Governor of Massachusetts,
Yeah, Governor of Massachusetts, and he made changes to insurance regulations for the state, making it so that insurance providers could no longer deny medical claims from transgender people. There was actually in Massachusetts insurance regulations, there were clauses in there that excluded any kind of medical coverage specifically for transgender reasons from coverage. That was excluded from coverage. So, yeah.
All those statutes had to be rewritten, it sounds like.
Yeah, after Deval made that announcement, all of those statutes had to be removed from the regulations, which took over a year. Because they were peppered out all throughout the regulations. So there was a lot of work they had to do to get that to happen. And then it was after we won that case, it was still 3 years before I was able to get my surgery because of all the red tape we had to go through to get it to happen.
And during this time before this decision was made by the state, were the medical bills piling up? Were you trying to pay them, or were they just piling up somewhere, or what was?
Oh, no. Everything else I had was covered. The weird thing about the case when Mass Health denied paying for my hormones was odd because they paid for my hormones in the 90s, but all of a sudden in the 2000s they didn't want to pay for them anymore. So okay, what's with that? And but they everything else was covered. So I didn't have any problems with that. And it's not like I went out and got the surgery and made them pay for it. There was no way I could do that.
Yeah.
So
yes. So briefly, if you would, Rikki, just for someone like myself and for others who might be listening to this podcast, for us who don't understand the steps that take place in transition surgery. Can you just kind of share at a high level sort of the various surgeries that you went through and the timeline for that?
Yeah, okay. I've had a lot of surgeries at this point, 9 to be exact. So, yeah, and so the first I went for the big stuff up front, and so yeah, the bottom surgery, to get technical, is a vaginoplasty, and they construct a vagina out of a penis. And that's a pretty involved surgery. I was in the hospital for 9 nights. So I was in the hospital for a long time for that one. The second surgery, now not all doctors who do gender surgery do it the same way, but the surgeon that I went to, he would, some surgeons would do these two things in one fell swoop, but he liked to break it up. So there was a second bottom surgery, which was a labiaplasty. And it was just more detail down there, and more functionality, because it all the stuff that they do, it all functions. It's all of the nerves and stuff are in the right place, and they all work. Everything works. So so that was the labiaplasty was the second surgery. The next surgery I got was mammoplasty. Okay, we all know what that is. Breast augmentation. And then the next surgery was on my face. We did a forehead surgery, and it's interesting with the facial surgery, facial feminization. It's a little bit different from just regular, cosmetic facial surgery, in that it's what the aim is to try to make the skull and the face feminine. A lot of that's based on forensic work, just to studying skeletal remains from archaeological digs and stuff, and trying to figure out whether the person was male or female. And, they discovered that there were certain characteristics of the skull that were different between male and female. And so these surgeries attempt to recreate that. And so the forehead surgery did a lot of stuff, softening the forehead and removing a sort of male brow line. And it also moved my scalp forward a little bit to help with the receding hairline. And then the next surgery was along the jawline. And once again, there's certain characteristics of a female jaw line that's different from male. And so they go in there and they change that. They grind the bone away, and they resculpt it. So that was the second facial feminization surgery. And then they did some fat grafting stuff where they, took fat off my belly, which I have plenty of at my age, and they, placed it around in certain areas to give it a more feminine appearance. And then I had surgery for my Adam's apple, which they can shave some of the cartilage away and make it appear more feminine.
That's remarkable, and I'm struck by the fact, and you must have thought this yourself about your surgeons, that it's both science and art here, right?
Absolutely, yes, yeah. So I was very, very fussy about who I wanted to go to, and that, I think that had a little bit to do with, that 3-year wait between our court win for the bottom surgery and me finally getting the surgeon, was that I wasn't just going to take any old surgeon. I wanted the best surgeon I can get, and I did. I went to the preeminent surgeon for that stuff in the country. So.
And is it fair to say that while you were in the midst of these surgeries, was there psychotherapy as well? Did that sort of support you in moving through this?
Yeah, ever since 1990, when I first came out, I've constantly had, psychotherapy. I just really need it. There's so much stuff that's going on that, and I still see a therapist regularly, and and that really helped a lot. Yeah.
And Rikki, so with that in mind, with both the experience of going through the surgeries and the therapy as well, for anyone who thinks they might be transgender, what is it important for them to know about the transition journey?
Well, I think
in terms of how to prepare for it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's surgery, so it's an unknown, but it's actually, I mean, it depends on the individual, but you have to prepare yourself for that. And, the thing is that if this is something that you really have gender dysphoria, and you've figured out that this is something you really need, that on the other side, there's a lot of relief.
I was going to ask about that. Talk about how you felt after as these surgeries progressed.
Yeah, I'll tell you, so I had terrible, terrible depression, going way, way back, even into the late 70s is when I had my first major, depressive crisis, but I tried all kinds of stuff at Mass General. They're state-of-the-art psychiatry there. We tried all kinds of stuff, and nothing really worked that good. All the psychiatric medications and other things, and all of the talk therapy. I was still depressed. I had my bottom surgery, and right away, I was way less depressed.
Wow.
As the surgeries have progressed, I mean, at this point, I'm almost, I would say I'm 98% depression free.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And so again, I'm thinking you went through these surgeries, you're a veteran, you really transformed the healthcare system in Massachusetts. What's your feeling about what we're seeing in the way of anti-trans legislation across the country to restrict these kinds of services?
It's terrible. It's terrible. I mean, it was great to be a part of moving things forward, with my legal appeals and all of that. And then to see things, roll back and get worse. And it's depressing, although I'm not depressed, but it's disheartening. It's horrifying. And we have to, mobilize and fight back, and I'm confident in the long run that things will, there'll be, there's right now we're feeling the Republican conservative wave, anti-trans wave, and things will change, especially as the younger kids grow older and become voting age and stuff.
Yes.
I think these things are going to change, but it's horrible right now. It's scary. It's really scary.
Well, as an LGBTQ plus member of that community myself, I can only imagine what the feeling of being othered must be like, because transgender people find themselves now in the situation that Blacks have found themselves in previous generations, that gays and lesbians did. So are you optimistic about the future of our society? Will we come around and become more tolerant, accepting?
In the longer arc, I think so, because I think if you look at the longer arc of humanity, we go through these different periods where there are horrific, injustices that happen, and slowly things get better. In the shorter run, I'm very afraid. I don't know what's going to happen in these states. Florida, is just absolutely frightening. And, I really fear for what's going to be happening. But it's still possible in our form of government for things to change. But it's I don't know, in a world where Donald Trump actually got elected, who knows what could happen? I mean, so I'm cautiously optimistic, but I think that we're going to take a few steps backwards before we finally move forward again.
Well, even here in the state of Massachusetts, the Commonwealth, it's better than it is in most places, but trans people still face challenges here, do they not?
For sure. Oh, yeah.
Talk about those a little bit.
Well, even just I'm not gonna get specific about anybody, but we have some local talk radio conservative people who are quite vocally anti-trans. And that's frightening because they have a microphone and they have a following, and they can whip people up into a frenzy. And this is not good. So, I mean, as liberal a state as we are, it's the nature of politics. Certain constituencies can get whipped up into a frenzy and get activated, whereas other constituencies can become apathetic and not end up participating, and that's the way the bad guys end up taking over, even when they're in the minority. And we just have to, make sure that the majority of us, who are sensible about this stuff, don't get apathetic and get out there and vote. And that's the biggest thing.
Let's shift gears now, and for the next few and final minutes, just talk about a couple of the other challenges of being trans, one of which is, we were talking about this a little bit, the dating scene. What's involved there for transgender folks such as yourself? I know there are apps and sites, but talk about what that experience is like and what the challenges are.
Yeah, and I think for some people it's probably great. There are apps that are welcoming to trans people. My personal experience with it was that I mentioned earlier that I was attracted to. I think I did. That I was attracted to girls, physically and romantically, and cisgender. And I'm not really, transgender people isn't really my sexual or romantic orientation at all. So it's very, very difficult to find cisgender women who might be interested in me, in being like a life partner, especially. Yeah. And the dating apps just don't. It's not on their radar. They seem to, my experience, I've tried a bunch of them. They want to hook me up with other trans people, or men who want to, hook up for a quickie, and for some people that's great. And for me, that's not what I'm looking for. So there's like nothing. It's like
it's a challenge. And I guess there are the hookup sites, but that's not really for you so much.
No. I fooled around with it. We said earlier, I'm bi, and after I was divorced and going through my own personal exploration, I fooled around with some of those hookup sites. And man, they work great. I gotta have like 3,000 men following me, and just like that, but that's not really what I wanted, So it was an interesting to find out that could happen, but that's not really what I'm looking for. So
I gotcha. And well, let's just kind of wrap up with two quick things. One of which is, at the end of the day, the band invited you back. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So there was my dark years, the 1990s. I was out of this band, and they were afraid. And then as the years went on, they started coming around, some of them, and eventually the whole band came around. And 10 years after they had fired me, they asked me back into the band. And this band was pretty popular on the Cape. We played at this place called the Wellfleet Beachcomber. We're there every Sunday in the summertime. So. They asked me back, and we were still doing the Beachcomber gig. And so I got to do another, 13 years at the Beachcomber. And in all, I ended up playing there like 450 times.
Wow.
And it was really, really great to be back with the band, and that they came around, because that was, that was really rough on me.
Well, I'm glad that they saw the light and came back around. And then you shared with me also a lovely little story about George Carlin and the fact that he was kind of hip back in the day, and he left us too soon, but he knew about you, right? And he was supportive, and you had dinner.
Yeah, he was wonderful guy, really funny, and I just so glad that I was able. Feel it's such a privilege to be able to have done what I did. I remember driving around in the car with him from one place to another when we were doing gigs on the road, and then there was this. So this was all before I came out, and then I came out and was out of the band. But the guy that was in that band who worked with George continued to work with George. And then after I was asked back in the band, I started going to see George with my friend opening. And George was like, he was so glad to see me the first time I showed up at a gig, and I'd been missing for 10 years. And really, really warm, and just wanted to know like what happened and how I was. And so that first time I saw him, I can't remember where it was, some show somewhere, and it was during a sound check in the afternoon, and he was like, you know what, we need to check up. Why don't you come have dinner with me in my dressing room? Let's do it at 7:00. Come on by and let's have dinner and catch up. And that was just so nice. He was so warm, and just wanted to know how I was doing. And his wife had recently died, and he opened up about that, and he got real open and personal, and it was very, very touching. Such a great human being in so many ways.
What a lovely story. And well, Rikki, we've covered a lot of ground. Is there anything I haven't asked you about that is top of mind for you that you would like to share with our listeners before we wrap?
No, I can't really think of anything. We covered a bunch of stuff.
Well, Rikki Bates, I want to thank you for taking the time today to share your story with me and with us. And I think you're an inspiration and will be a future inspiration to many others going forward. So thank you so much again.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. Your podcast series is awesome, and thank you so much for doing that and for asking me here.
Thank you for listening to today's interview. Founded in 1973, PFLAG is the first and largest organization for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people and their parents, families, friends, and allies. We have over 400 chapters and more than 200,000 members and supporters nationwide. Our members come from every generation and live in cities, small towns, and rural areas across the United States. PFLAG is committed to creating a world where diversity is celebrated and all people are respected, valued, and affirmed. For more information about PFLAG, explore the rest of this website or visit PFLAG National at pflag.org.